What's up, y'all? My name's Ian and I'm with TEQSPORT. And today I want to talk to you guys about one of my favorite platforms of all time, the Toyota 86 and the Subaru BRZ. I want to walk you guys through what I believe are the top 10 mods that make the biggest difference when building one. So to understand why this car matters, we really have to go back to the beginning. In the 1980s, Toyota released the AE86 Corolla. It wasn't fast, it wasn't luxurious, but it was a lightweight, rear-wheel drive, and incredibly communicative. Enthusiasts loved it because it rewarded driver skill. You didn't need big power to have fun, you needed balance, feedback, and confidence. So fast forward to 2013, Toyota and Subaru teamed up to bring that same philosophy back with the Scion FRS and Subaru BRZ. It had a naturally aspirated engine with 100 horsepower per liter, a low center of gravity thanks to the Boxer layout, rear-wheel drive, and a chassis designed around handling first. Now, with the second generation GR86 and BRZ, we've got more power, more torque, better mid-range, a stiffer chassis, and updated styling, all while keeping the spirit of the original car intact. So today, I want to walk you guys through what I consider the top 10 mods that give you the biggest improvement per dollar, especially if you're building the car in stages and want to do things the right way. So a quick disclaimer before we jump in. There are always more expensive options. There are always race versions. There's always a way to spend more money. These recommendations are about balance. They're about real-world performance, reliability, and enjoyment. This isn't a max effort list, it's a smart, enthusiast-focused one. Number 1, tires. If you do only one thing to your 86 or BRZ, make it tires. Nothing else comes close. A good 200 treadwear tire completely transforms how this car drives. My go-to recommendations here are Yokohama and Falcon 200 treadwear options. But any 200 treadwear tire, you're gonna get dramatically more grip, better braking, sharper turn-in, and way more confidence at the limit. And what's important to understand is that tires don't just add grip, they make every other mod work better. Your suspension, your brakes, you'll even be able to put power down better. This is where your money should go first, every single time. Number 2, wheels. Once you upgrade tires, wheels are the natural next step. For this platform, the sweet spot in my opinion is a 17x9 wheel with an offset in the plus 42 to plus 48 range. That size gives you proper tire support without killing steering feel or suspension geometry. With a lighter wheel, you're reducing unsprung weight, you're improving response, and you're setting the car up to take full advantage of better tires. Wheels are a functional upgrade, not just a cosmetic one, even though they look amazing. Number 3, an ECU tune. So a tune is where the car really starts to wake up. Our recommendation here is an EQTEC tune. We offer tuning packages here at TEQSPORT, especially with flex fuel capability. With flex fuel, you'll get extra power over 93 octane, but any tune is going to give you smoother power delivery, meaningful gains throughout the rev range. And what I like about this approach is that you're not just pushing the engine beyond its comfort zone, you're refining it and you're optimizing it. And that is going to make the car feel more responsive and connected to your right foot. Number 4, brake pads and fluid. You do not need a big brake kit to enjoy this car. What you do need are proper pads and fluid. So we recommend Hawk brake pads paired with a good Motul fluid like RBF 660. It's good for track use. This combo will give you a better initial bite, better heat resistance, and much more consistent braking, especially if you're driving hard on track. The factory calipers are actually quite good, but are fundamentally limited in their thermal capacity. And so when you exceed that is when you should think about a big brake kit. So braking upgrades are all about confidence, knowing the brakes will be there every time you press the pedal. Number 5, coilovers. So suspension is where I want to slow down a little bit because this is also where I see people accidentally make the car worse. The 86 and BRZ are really well sorted from the factory. That means it doesn't take much to upset the balance if you're not careful. So before I talk about what coilovers I recommend, I want to talk about what not to do, because a lot of people start here with good intentions and end up chasing problems. So one of the biggest mistakes I see is chasing looks instead of function. Things like staggered wheel and tire setups. They look aggressive, but on a low power, balance focused car like this, all you're really doing is building understeer into the chassis from the start. Yes, you can tune around it with sway bars and things like that, but there's no reason to complicate something that already works so well with a square setup. Another one is big, heavy wheels. Even if the size technically fits, adding a lot of weight at each corner hurts everything. Ride quality will suffer, acceleration and braking will suffer, and the suspension has a harder time controlling the wheel. Lighter wheels make the dampers feel better even on stock suspension. Lowering springs are another area where people get into trouble. A small drop with the proper spring rate can work fine, but once you start dropping the car a lot on springs, you're taking away that valuable suspension travel. You might end up riding on the bump stops constantly, and sometimes before you even hit a real bump. So at that point, the car might look lower, but it actually handles worse. Upgraded shocks can help in some ways, but they can't magically give you back lost suspension travel. And then there's coilovers. Coilovers give you more flexibility, but they don't make physics disappear. Dropping the car too much still messes with suspension geometry. Roll center changes, dynamic alignment changes, and that disconnected or sloppy feeling people complain about, that's geometry fighting back. The cars that you see work well at very low ride heights are also running much stiffer spring rates with high quality dampers, or they're using geometry correction parts. They're not just cranking budget coilovers all the way down and hoping for the best. What also matters is alignment. Trying to dial camber back to 0 after lowering is a mistake on these cars. Front camber is your friend here. Anything close to 0 up front is basically asking for understeer. And moderate negative camber doesn't automatically destroy tires. Toe is what actually kills them. A proper alignment usually improves grip in tire wear. And finally, tires need to match the suspension. Very stiff suspension on all-season or OEM tires overloads the tire and reduces grip. Conversely, sticky tires on very soft suspension can still add grip, but the car feels loose and sloppy. Everything has to work together. When people stack a few of these mistakes together, they end up with a car that feels numb, sloppy, and less fun than stock. And that's the worst part, because this platform is fantastic when it's set up correctly. Which brings me to what you should do. A good coilover setup is about control, not just ride height. You want quality dampers, reasonable spring rates, and enough suspension travel to let the car work. That's why our recommendation here is the HKS Hypermax S. They're on the car behind me here. These are designed as a true street performance coilover. You get excellent damping control, better body control without harshness, and a setup that still works on real roads, not just smooth track surfaces. You can lower the car modestly, improve response, and still maintain compliance. The car feels calmer, more predictable, more confidence-inspiring, and most importantly, it still feels like an 86. So good suspension doesn't call attention to itself. It just makes the car feel right. That's always the goal here, is to preserve the balance, preserve the feedback, and make the car better without breaking what already works. Number 6, exhaust. All right, this is where things can get fun, and also where things can go wrong quickly. So I want to approach this next one carefully and honestly. So for most owners, the first exhaust change is a catback or an axle back, and that makes sense. This is primarily about sound and character, not big power gains. Our recommendations here are systems like the AWE catback or the Remark axle back, depending on what sound level you're after. The key thing with a catback is tone. You want something that adds depth and volume without introducing drone, rasp, or harshness, especially on a daily driven car. A good catback should make you enjoy the car every time you drive it, not make you regret it on the highway. Now let's talk about headers. If you spend any time in the 86 community, you already know this. an aftermarket header is widely considered the biggest bang for the buck power mod on both the FA20 and FA24 engines, but only when paired with a proper tune. Without a tune, you're not gaining much and you can actually make things worse. Market-wide, you'll see two main header designs. Unequal length headers, or UEL, are known for their classic boxer rumble and strong mid-range torque. Equal length headers give up that rumble but tend to make better top-end power and flow more efficiently at higher RPM. They both work, they both have their trade-offs, and they both completely change the character of the car after you tune for them. So aside from power, headers have the biggest impact on exhaust sound, and not always in a good way. This is where a lot of people get burned. A poorly matched header and exhaust combination can introduce rasp, drone, and harshness that completely ruins the driving experience. The key is what's downstream of the header. A proper setup needs sufficient sound control, and what that usually means is at least 2 resonators in the system, and either 1 large muffler or 2 smaller mufflers at the rear. And this is especially important with equal length headers, which can get very raspy very quickly if the exhaust isn't designed properly. A good header doesn't automatically mean good sound. The header, the mid-pipe, the resonators, and mufflers all have to work together as a system, and when they do, the car will sound deep, smooth, and aggressive without being obnoxious. When they don't, it's loud, buzzy, and exhausting to live with. So at TEQSPORT, we're really deliberate about how we approach exhaust modifications. We're focusing on combinations that make sense, that sound good, and that don't create problems down the road. Headers absolutely work. They absolutely make power with the right tune, but they also come with trade-offs, and they're not something that you should rush into without a plan. So whether you stop at a catback or eventually move into headers and tuning, the goal is the same, is to improve the experience, not just chase numbers, get the sound right, get the flow right, and make sure everything works together. Number 7, intakes. All right, let's talk about intakes. This is one of those mods where expectations and reality don't always line up, so it's worth slowing down for a minute. On the FA20 and FA24 engines, an intake is not a huge power adder. Subaru and Toyota did a very good job from the factory, and they didn't leave a lot of free volumetric efficiency on the table. So realistically, most intakes are worth a small amount of power, and sometimes almost none, especially without tuning for it. So that said, intakes do offer other benefits. You get more induction noise, you get a cleaner, more aggressive look in the engine bay, and depending on the design, you can free up space or in some cases crowd it out. So for a lot of owners of GR86 and BRZs, the biggest upgrade here is sound with an intake. You hear the engine breathe more, throttle response will feel sharper, and the car feels more engaging, even if the dyno numbers don't move much. And honestly, that's okay. Not every mod has to be about peak horsepower. So where people get into trouble is intake design. A lot of intakes on the market aren't really cold air intakes at all. If an intake isn't properly sealed to the factory snorkel, or if it doesn't isolate itself from engine bay heat, it is essentially a hot air intake. That means higher intake air temps, inconsistent performance, and sometimes worse results than stock, especially in rear-world driving. That's why I generally recommend avoiding open element intakes that just sit in the engine bay without proper sealing or ducting. They might sound great, they might look great, but they're not actually doing the engine any favors. One thing we've learned from our own intake testing and shootouts is this: budget-friendly options like a drop-in filter and an upgraded inlet tube produce nearly the same power gains as many of the more expensive fully boxed intakes. So in some cases, the difference is literally 1 or 2 horsepower. The more expensive intakes often look better and sound better, but from a pure performance standpoint, the gains are very similar. So that data is exactly why we've been very deliberate about intake development at TEQSPORT. We're working on a true cold air intake, one that's properly sealed, pulls air from the right location, and avoids heat soak. It's heavily influenced by what we've seen work and not work across the aftermarket over the years. The goal with this one isn't just to make something that looks good or makes noise, it's to make something that actually makes sense. So with all of that said, I do want to give you guys a couple practical recommendations based on what we sell and what we've tested ourselves. If you're looking for a budget-friendly option that genuinely works, the AFE Superstock induction kit is a great example. So this setup combines a high-quality drop-in filter with an upgraded inlet tube, and that's it. It's easy to install. In our testing, it finished just 1 peak horsepower shy of our top-performing intake, which is honestly impressive considering the price and simplicity. We ended up leaving the GR performance intake on ours because it performs, it keeps air intake temps under control, and it doesn't try to reinvent something that the factory already did really well. It just improves upon it, and it looks great in the engine bay. So if you want the best overall result from what we offer, especially if aesthetics and engine bay presentation matter to you, the GR performance intake is the one. In our testing, this intake produced the highest peak horsepower of the group, but just as importantly, it looks incredible in the engine bay, maintaining proper sealing and airflow, and it avoids the heat soak issues you see with poorly designed intakes. Yes, it costs more. Yes, the power difference is small, but if you care about appearance, sound, and maximizing what little headroom there is on this platform intake-wise, this is the one that we recommend. Key takeaway here isn't that one intake is magic and the other isn't. It's that well-designed options, even simple ones, can perform just as well as complex setups. So choose an intake based on your priorities, your budget, aesthetics, and how you want the car to feel. An intake should complement the car, not fight against the engineering that's already there. So you need to know what you're buying it for and be realistic about the gains. Choose designs that work with the factory airflow and not against it. Number 8, an oil cooler, oil cooling. This is one of those mods that doesn't get enough attention until something goes wrong. And on the 86 platform, oil temperature management is absolutely critical if you're driving the car hard. So let's start with the first generation FA20 cars. From the factory, these engines do not have an engine oil cooler at all. It's very well documented that on track, oil temperatures can climb alarmingly high very quickly. That's not just a reliability concern. High oil temps will thin the oil out, reduce the pressure, and increase wear, especially during high RPM, sustained high load driving like on track. For first gen cars that see track time, an oil cooler, in my opinion, is not optional. It's one of the first reliability mods you should be thinking about. In general, we recommend air-to-air oil coolers as the most effective solution. They actually remove heat from the oil rather than just stabilizing it. And if you're running one on the street as well as a track, a thermostatic sandwich plate is extremely important. A thermostat prevents overcooling. Oil that runs too cold isn't good either. It doesn't flow properly, it doesn't protect as well. So the goal is controlled temperature, not just the lowest number possible. So where a lot of people get into trouble is cooler placement. Airflow here matters, and it matters a lot. Where you mount the oil cooler and what airflow it's stealing or blocking can dramatically affect how the entire cooling stack works. So one very common mistake, especially on boosted cars, is putting an oil cooler in front of the intercooler. What ends up happening here is the oil cooler heats up the air going into the intercooler, and that heat soak reduces the intercooler efficiency, which raises intake temps and robs power. So yes, you cooled the oil, but you lost power while doing it. Cooling systems need to be thought of as a system, not individual parts added one at a time. Now, let's talk about second generation FA24 cars. From the factory, these engines do have an oil to water heat exchanger, but it's important to understand what that system is really doing. The factory unit uses engine coolant to warm up the oil faster and help stabilize oil temperature. It's great for street driving and warming the oil up on cold days, but it's not a true oil cooler in the traditional sense. On track, once oil temperatures exceed coolant temperatures, that system can no longer pull heat out of the oil effectively. And at that point, it's more of an oil warmer or stabilizer than a cooler. And that's why many people have found it to be insufficient for sustained track abuse. As a result, some owners have seen more stable oil temperatures and even slightly higher, more consistent oil pressure by deleting the factory oil-to-wire unit and installing a proper air-to-air oil cooler. Again, this isn't something that you need for street driving, but for track-driven cars, the data is starting to show clear benefits. One last point that often gets overlooked is that high oil temperatures don't just affect reliability, they affect performance. As oil temperatures climb, the ECU can start pulling timing as a protective measure, and when timing comes out, power goes down. So keeping oil temps under control isn't just about longevity, it's about maintaining consistent power lap after lap. Number 9, oil pan. So now that we've talked about oil temperature and cooling, we need to talk about oil control. Because keeping oil cool doesn't matter much if the engine can't reliably access it. On the second generation FA24 cars, there's a well-documented issue that shows up during aggressive driving, especially on track. So under sustained high lateral Gs, particularly in long right-hand corners, these engines have been shown to experience oil pressure drops. That's not speculation, it is data, there's lots of it out there. And oil pressure loss, even briefly, is how bearings get damaged and engines go boom. This isn't about abuse or driver error, it's happening on stock engines with stock oil on capable tires with capable drivers. It's a system level limitation and it's not a one-off failure. So why does this happen? There's two main contributors here. The first is oil movement inside the pan. Under sustained lateral load, oil can slosh away from the pickup faster than the factory baffling can control it. And when that happens, pressure drops, even if oil temperature looks fine. The second issue is something that surprised a lot of owners. From the factory, the FA24 uses RTV sealant on the oil pan and timing cover, and in many cases, excess RTV has been found breaking loose over time, and that material doesn't just disappear, it can get sucked up into the oil pickup and trapped against the pickup tube screen, or the strainer as they call it. And once that screen is particularly blocked, oil flow and pressure can suffer if it's really bad. So that's why we've seen so many owners dropping the factory oil pan. Sometimes it's to inspect it and clean the pickup tube screen out and get that RTV out as a preventative measure. And once you're in there, it makes sense to address the root cause, not just the symptoms. So this is where an upgraded, high-capacity, baffled oil pan makes sense. A properly designed pan improves oil control under high G loads and gives you the opportunity to eliminate the RTV debris concern in one step. You're not just cleaning the problem, you're fixing it. At TEQSPORT, this is something we've taken very seriously. We've already shared quite a bit about this publicly in our development thread on gr86.org, and I encourage anyone interested to check that out. What we've talked about there is our approach to solving this problem the right way. We're developing two oil pan options. One OEM Plus style pan that focuses on improved baffling and oil control while maintaining factory-like fitment and serviceability, and a higher capacity, performance-oriented pan designed for drivers who see frequent track abuse and sustained high G loads. Both of our pan designs focus on improved oil pickup coverage, controlled oil movement under braking and cornering, and long-term reliability, not just peak performance numbers. An oil pan and a baffle is one of the most important things you can do if you drive the car the way it was intended to be driven. Oiling issues don't give second chances, and by the time you hear or feel a problem, it's usually already too late. So just like with oil cooling, our philosophy here is system level thinking. Oil temperature, oil pressure, oil control, they all work together. A cooler without control doesn't solve the problem, and control without cooling doesn't either. Number 10, boost. All right, now we're at the deep end of the pool. With boost, this is where the car really changes character. Forced induction is a decision that starts to matter a lot more with regards to budget. So let's start with the big picture. Turbos and superchargers both work, but they behave very differently. Owners who have spent time with both will usually tell you the same thing. Turbos tend to feel punchier. They deliver power and torque earlier, and they offer more usable area under the torque curve. That torque hit is addictive, especially on a car that starts out naturally aspirated. Superchargers, on the other hand, deliver power in a more linear and predictable way. There's no waiting for boost, there's no sudden hit, and you just get steady power that builds with RPM. Neither is right or wrong, they just feel different. So we offer the HKS GT3 Turbo Kit. It is an amazing option that gives you a lot of power headroom, whether you're on 93 octane with a 300 wheel horsepower goal, or your goals are north of 400 horsepower and you want to run an E85 and fueling upgrades to get there. It is one of the best options out there on the market for turbo kits. So with superchargers, there's a couple different philosophies. Centrifugal superchargers behave a bit differently, like a belt-driven turbo. They build boosts with RPM, and they feel smoother down low, and they really wake up at the top end. A positive displacement supercharger like twin screw or root style design make boost almost immediately with every rotation, and that means stronger low and mid-range torque, which is where these cars spend most of their time. My personal preference when it comes to superchargers on this platform leans towards the Harrop kit, and that comes down to a few key things. Number one, it's extremely well engineered. It manages heat very well on track, and its torque curves get surprisingly close to what many turbo kits deliver without the same complexity. And on top of that, it's offered in carb legal trim. So that combination is a big reason why it's become so popular. So no matter which route you choose, Boost isn't a casual upgrade. You're committing to proper tuning, cooling upgrades, fueling considerations, and long-term maintenance. Forced induction isn't a bolt-on and forget it mod. And it's also not where I'd recommend starting. Boost should come after you've sorted tires, suspension, brakes, and even oiling. That's how you end up with a fast car that stays together. So at TEQSPORT, forced induction is something that we're thinking about very carefully. We don't know yet which direction we'll go, a turbo or supercharger. Everyone has their preferences. Our engineers all have their preferences too. But what matters most to us is that we're developing something that makes sense for the majority of owners. What makes the 8.6 platform so special isn't just how fast it can be, it's how good it feels, how connected it is, and how rewarding it is to drive. So at TEQSPORT, our goal is to support builds that make sense, with upgrades that improve the experience, protect the car, and keep it fun long term. If you've got questions about your build, future plans, or where to start, drop them in the comments. And if you guys want deeper dives into any of these mods, let us know. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.